All right, so these are going to be my Premier League predictions for the midway point of the season. So right now we're at midway point, 19 games played, and so I figured I'd go through and predict the entire table from 20th to first to see how the season ends up. So we're going to start off with the relegation teams, and I'm going to go with Sheffield United in 20th, Burnley in 19th, and Luton in 18th. So I do think that all of the newly promoted teams will get relegated. Uh, Luton are the only team that I have any sort of hope for. I just think they have, the fight, the grit that you need to stay in the Premier League. They made it difficult for the big teams that have gone to Kenilworth Road. Whereas Burnley and Sheffield United have been a bit soft, a bit flimsy, which is something you never want to be as a newly promoted team. But still, ultimately, I think Luton will go down, despite their determination. I do think they'll make it close towards the end of the season, but I just don't think they have the quality to stay up. I don't think Rob Edwards is a Premier League level manager, and so they will ultimately go back down to the Championship. So moving on to 17th, I'm going to go with Everton. Now, Everton, I think, actually have a really good team, and they're doing well under Sean Dyche, especially when you consider the start that they made. But that points deduction is going to be huge. Like, they should be finishing around mid-table, but with that 10 points point deduction, I think it's going to really hit them when it comes to the end of the season. And I don't think there's ever going to be much concern that they're going to go down. But what I think might happen is they survive and then they kind of just chill out for the last couple weeks and kind of slide down to 17th. But yeah, I don't think they're really in a ton of danger because I do think that they're going to make up the amount of points they need, regardless of the deduction. So moving on to 16th, I'm going to go with Crystal Palace, and 15th is going to be Nottingham Forest. Now, I think these two teams are massively getting away with it right now. Crystal Palace just looks so dead, so void of ideas. I know they came back against Man City, which was a really good result for them. But if you look at how they played against Liverpool, they were up 1-0, they let it slip. Chelsea, they equalized, and then of course they give up that penalty in the 90th minute. And overall, Roy Hodgson just seems tired. He just seems done. And I don't think that he's a manager that can really inspire the team to do much. Again, I think they'll be fine because they have Eze, they have Elise. And so that should give them enough goals to stay in the league. But I just think the lack of creativity, the lack of, spark from Roy Hodgson is going to be a massive blow. I think the only way Palace can really do anything besides barely survive the season is if they get maybe a younger manager, someone that's more progressive, someone with sort of newer ideas, because that's really what this team needs right now. Forest, again, massively getting away with it. They did sack Steve Cooper, which I do think is the right move. Again, I just don't think Steve Cooper was getting the best out of his team. So appointing Nuno, again, Nuno is a good appointment. It's a good appointment for kind of a lower tier team. Obviously, he did really well with Wolves, and I don't think he's going to get Forest into the Europa League, but I think he is going to do a good enough job to keep them stable, keep them in the Premier League. Because again, Forest's team, they do have some decent players. I think Alanga's a decent player. Chris Wood, It's a good player. Gibbs White, for a bottom half team, they're actually really good players. So Forest, again, another side, I think they're going to be staying up. It's going to be a little bit close, I think, towards the end of the season, but ultimately they will be fine. So moving on to 14th, I'm going to go with Fulham. So Fulham they're a very interesting team this season because, we all thought they were going to struggle without Mitrovic, and they were struggling for a while. Then they pulled off those back-to-back 5-0 wins, and, it was looking really good for them at a point. But then, obviously, now they've lost to Newcastle, they lost to Burnley, they lost to Bournemouth. They're just a really inconsistent team, and I think without someone like Mitrovic in their team, they don't have a reliable source of goals. So I think that inconsistency is going to continue because Raul Jimenez, Carlos Vinicius, they're very inconsistent players. Raul Jimenez, he was fantastic against, I think it was against Forest, where he scored 2 goals. And then the next game he goes and gets a stupid red card. So I think Fulham will be fine. But again, kind of uninspiring when you consider what they achieved last season as a newly promoted team. But yeah, I fully expect them to stay in the league. So moving on to 13th, I have Brentford. 12th is going to be Bournemouth. And then 11th is going to be Wolves. I think these 3 teams are all interchangeable. I think they're all very close in terms of quality. Brentford are an interesting team because they're really missing Ivan Toney. I think ultimately Toney will leave. I just don't think you can be as good a striker as him and not take up an opportunity when so many top teams are after you. I would personally love him at Arsenal. But yeah, I think he will leave. Obviously, Raya's not there anymore. So, I'd say their 2 best players from last season aren't there, and they're really missing a little something, a little spark to really get them going. And they just look like a very uninspiring team this season. I know they still have Mbeumo and Vissa, who are good enough, definitely to keep them in the league, probably to finish around about mid-table. But yeah, again, I think Brentford, if you look at what they did last season, finishing 9th with Ivan Toney, scoring whatever it was, 20-something goals, I think you could expect a bit more from them. But overall, it's going to be a good season. They're not going to go down, and I think they're going to be in a decent spot when it comes to rebuilding again, maybe getting a new striker in, new goalkeeper, and really going again next season. All right, so Bournemouth in 12th, I think is going to be one of the most exciting teams in the league. In the second half of the season, we saw they started super slow. They couldn't win a game, and then all of a sudden it just clicked for Iraola, and they're amazing. I mean, we've seen them now. They've gone to Old Trafford. They absolutely smacked United. Played Fulham off the park. They're just a very exciting team. Solanke's in amazing form. And really, Iraola he could be a very, very underrated manager. I don't think anyone knew a ton about him when he came into the Premier League. I certainly didn't, but I figured there could be potentially a bit of a learning curve for Iraola in the Premier League, and there was. But now I think we're seeing that he's a really, really talented coach. And I think he's going to get Bournemouth comfortably mid-table. So moving on to Wolves in 11th, I think Wolves have the most underrated manager in the league, Gary O'Neill. If you look at what he's done, he's just gone into awful situations across the Premier League. If you think about Bournemouth last season, he kept them up when pretty much everyone had them relegated. This season, Wolves. If you look at Wolves' transfer window over the summer, losing Neves, losing Moutinho, losing Adama Traore, Jimenez, Nathan Collins, and not really bringing anyone in. And then you add on top of that Julian Lopetegui left as well. You could have very easily seen Wolves go down. But Gary O'Neill's come in, and the most impressive thing is that he's got Wolves scoring goals. Wolves never score goals, but He has Huang scoring. I think he's got, 8, 9 goals in the league. It's really, really good. And he's doing all of this without Pedro Neto, who's been injured. And he was such a key player for them early on in the season. So, yeah, total admiration for Gary O'Neill. I think he's going to be absolutely incredible for Wolves. And they're going to have a really good season. So, moving on to 10th, I have West Ham. I know West Ham are doing absolutely amazing this season. I know they just beat Arsenal at the Emirates. They beat Man United. They're playing really, really well. I love their players. Paqueta, I know he's injured now, but he was incredible. Kudos has been an amazing signing. I think Alvarez and Ward-Prowse were amazing in midfield against Arsenal. They outplayed Declan Rice for the majority of that season, for the game. So yeah, I love what West Ham are doing. The only problem is, I think once it gets to the Europa League knockout stages, I do think they're going to take it really, really seriously to try and get into the Champions League. Because as good as they are, I don't really see a path to top 4 for them. I definitely see a path to top 6 if they prioritize the Premier League. But we have seen in the past, a couple years ago when they were in the Europa League, they really prioritized it, and it ended in a bit of a drop-off in form towards the second half of the season. And I think when you consider the fact that, again, they don't have a ton of squad depth. I mean, Jared Bowen is incredible playing down the middle. But if he gets injured, if Kudos gets injured, they don't really have anyone of that quality that can replace them. So at the end of the season, when the games get all piled up again, they could really struggle to deal with that. And so I think they are going to drop off and finish around mid-table. So moving on to 9th, I have Brighton. So Brighton are, again, in a similar state to West Ham, where I don't necessarily think they have the squad depth to compete on multiple fronts. And again, another team that's going to probably take the Europa League very seriously. So their form could be a bit inconsistent towards the end of the season. But I think the important thing to realize with Brighton is that they've had a lot of injuries, especially over the last couple months. You're thinking Encisio's been out for pretty much the entire season. Stupinian's been out. Evan Ferguson was out for a while. So I think it's really impressive how Brighton have managed to keep up through this time. I mean, they had James Miller playing as a fullback recently because they have so many injuries. So yeah, again, I think they're very close in terms of quality with West Ham, but I'm going to edge them because I just think that Roberto De Zerbi is a better manager than David Moyes. And, we saw they weren't the worst at the end of last season when they had to manage the FA Cup and the Premier League, whereas West Ham completely collapsed the minute they had any sort of conflict with the Conference League and the Premier League. So I just think that De Zerbi is going to manage it a little bit better than Moyes. So that's why I'm going to shade Brighton over West Ham. So in 8th, I'm going to go with Chelsea. 7th is going to be Newcastle. So I think, again, these two teams very close. Could finish, again, a little interchangeable. But Chelsea are just the more inconsistent team of the two. They're both very inconsistent at the moment. And Chelsea is just a bit ridiculous at this point to spend £1 billion and be 10th in the league right now. Probably not going to make it into Europa League, maybe a Conference League if you're lucky. And it's just a bit ridiculous. Like I said with Chelsea, I mean their star striker, the heir to Didier Drogba's. I mean, he's more interested in talking to girls on OnlyFans than he is putting the ball in the back of the net. It's kind of embarrassing, honestly, if I was a Chelsea fan. Enzo Fernandez has been distinctly average since he joined. Caicedo has been average. Again, £200 million worth of talent, and they've been average since they've gotten to Chelsea. There's no consistency in the side. Their best defenders, 40 years old. Robert Sanchez in goal is absolutely atrocious. I don't even know who they're playing in goal now. I know he hasn't started the last couple games. But yeah, I can't see Chelsea finishing anywhere except 8th, ninth, maybe 7th if they're lucky. Newcastle, I think, is a bit more acceptable when you consider the amount of injuries that they've had, the fact that they've even somewhat kept pace. They beat United, they beat Chelsea, they beat Arsenal. Yeah, they've beaten some big teams this season. And then they obviously had that ridiculous run of games where, they didn't make they made one substitution in 5 games. So I think once Newcastle gets some players back fit, going out of Europe, I think was a really good thing for them in terms of their league finish. But yeah, once they get more players back, they'll be a much more consistent team. They'll be much more energetic. Because right now they just look exhausted, and I mean they've played so many games. They've had so few substitutions, so few options off the bench. It's just been a really difficult period for Newcastle. And, obviously, Tonali's banned until next season, which is a huge blow because I think he's a fantastic midfielder. But yeah, I think Newcastle will be all right. Ultimately, 7th, when you consider that they were in the Champions League, is not the greatest. But if you look at the fact that they haven't really spent a ton of money, they don't have the best squad depth, they're certainly not a Champions League caliber squad, I think 7th is a really acceptable season. So, moving on from 6th to 4th, I think the teams could honestly come in any order, but I'm going to go with Man United in 6th, Aston Villa in 5th, and Tottenham in 4th. So, Man United, I know they beat Aston Villa. Højlund scored his first goal in 14 games. Congratulations. But yeah, United, like Chelsea, they're just in an absolute state as a club. When you look at the ownership situation, Erik ten Hag he's probably just saved his job, which I'm not really sure that that's a good thing for United fans when you look at what's been going on. Players coming out saying that they're running too much in training, that training sessions are too difficult. And he's been banning journalists from press conferences. It's just a really, really awful situation at United. The Jadon Sancho situation, whether he's going to play for the club again, he's probably not. The Antony situation, the fact that the guy still hasn't scored this season, he cost, £85 million. It's again, just a bit ridiculous that these players are so average and they cost so much money. But yeah, United are not in any sort of state to make top 4. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe after the Villa game they're gonna put a run together and put some more pressure on Villa, Tottenham, Newcastle, anyone kind of going for those top 4 spots. But yeah, I just don't see the quality in the team. I know Lisandro Martinez is going to come back. Casemiro is going to come back. But ultimately, they're not the kind of players that are going to, fire United up the league. They're not. I mean, Casemiro used to be world class, but the guy's finished. He's not the player he used to be. So yeah, I just don't see a way United get into the top 4 unless they spend big in January and bring in some genuinely world class players. Because right now, there's not a single world-class player in that squad. So, yeah. Aston Villa in 5th. I think they could easily make top 4. I think they have the quality to. The issue is, I don't think they can handle the pressure. I think we've seen now 2 weeks in a row they've had the opportunity to go top of the league. And they've choked in the 2 straight games. I think once you get to the end of the season and Villa need to win 2 out of 3 to get top 4, I think that's a situation they could very easily throw it away. But I love what they're doing. I love what Aston Villa are doing. I think Unai Emery is a fantastic manager. I don't think he was right for Arsenal. I don't think he did particularly well at Arsenal, but I recognize that he was a very he is a very very good coach. He's definitely capable of making top four, but again, not sure they can handle the pressure. And also, there is the issue of the Conference League because we saw at Arsenal when it came down to it, top four run in, Emery threw it away to prioritize the Europa League. And here, if Villa can make top four and Emery sees a chance to go for the Conference League, I could very easily see Emery going for that over prioritizing top four. And lastly, Tottenham in fourth. They are plenty good enough to come fourth. I think they've shown this season under Postecoglou that they can play some amazing football. I think once Madison comes back, once Van de Ven comes back, they're going to be fine. I know they've been very inconsistent recently, but I think that's more so down to injuries than anything else. So I think once they get players back fit, they'll be fine. They don't have enough for a title challenge. They're not. I mean, people were way overhyping them at the start of the season when they were doing well, but they're definitely good enough to come in as a top four. Now, moving on to probably the most exciting part of this whole video, which is who's going to win the league. So I think that Arsenal, Man City, and Liverpool could all win it. And I don't think any of them have really looked particularly good this season. I think they've all been flawed. They've all been a bit inconsistent. I think if you look at Liverpool, dropping points to United at home, dropping points to Brighton, dropping points to Luton, they've been really, really bad in certain games. Of course, they have won the most points in the league from losing positions, which I do think says a lot about their mentality. Arsenal have also been very inconsistent. I think dropping points, to West Ham at home, Fulham, Chelsea. Really games that Arsenal should be winning if they want to win the league. And then City have won 2 out of the last, 7 games? 6 games? I think it was 2 out of the last 7. Really, really poor run of form. Obviously, De Bruyne's coming back. Haaland's coming back. 2 massive players for them, which will give them a boost. But I also think we've seen a major weakness in the City team, which is that without Rodri, they don't really have a midfield. Now, again, that could be solved when De Bruyne comes back, but also City haven't been struggling creatively. They've been making chances. They've been fine, I think. I mean, they're the top scorers in the league. I think they've been fine in that department. But the problem for them has been controlling games. They've let too many games slip. And that's something that I don't think De Bruyne really helps you with. I think, Ruben Diaz needs to turn his form around. Kyle Walker also needs to turn his form around. John Stones is injured constantly, and he's been played in midfield this season. And it's just a very weird situation at Man City. So, it's going to be an interesting title race because, like I said, no one's been particularly good. No one's been particularly bad either. I think all 3 teams are very similar. I think on paper, City have the most quality, followed by Liverpool probably, because Liverpool just have a much more experienced team in terms of, a lot of their players have won the league. Klopp's won the league. But yeah, I think Arsenal have massive potential. I think the fact that Arsenal are still second in the league, 2 points off the top, having played nowhere near what we know they can play like, is, I mean, it's partially an encouraging sign, partially a worrying sign. I think to think if Arsenal really have the mentality to win the league, but to kind of get out of second gear and to really go for it, But yeah, I mean, if Arsenal go out and buy a striker, a 20-goal season striker, Ivan Toney, Victor Osimhen, there's no reason why Arsenal can't win the league. If Liverpool go out and buy a defensive midfielder, and so they can properly control games, there's no reason why they couldn't win the league. And then obviously once City get De Bruyne back, there's no reason why City couldn't win the league. So it's going to be really, really close. I don't expect anyone to really pull away until the last couple games of the season. So I'm going to go with Man City in third, Liverpool in second, and Arsenal in first. I just think that the potential quality, the way that Arsenal can play is going to shine through in the end. I think Arsenal are a lot less emotional than they are last year. I think there's a bit of, ruggedness about this Arsenal side. I think we've seen them bounce back from adversity in really, really positive ways. And they're the only team this season that can properly control a game. If you look at the way that they controlled Man City, if you look at the way they controlled the game against Liverpool for periods of time, I just think that element of control is going to come in big towards the end of the season. If Arsenal can be a little bit more consistent, cannot make so many defensive errors, there's no reason why Arsenal couldn't win the league. But anyways, let me know what you guys think about my Premier League predictions, and make sure you throw your predictions in the comment section as well.